Hello and welcome to Chess Goblin. In this video, we will be looking at a game played on the 5th round of the Madrid Chess Festival happening in Madrid, Spain. This game is played between Levy Rozman, or better known as GothamChess, and Les Martinez, a grandmaster from Cuba. And now heading into this game, Levy has been doing exceptionally well in this tournament. He has 2 wins and 2 draws, and he's leading the tournament. Levy came into this tournament as the lowest rated player, but is doing exceptionally well against higher rated grandmasters. And in this game, Levy's playing with the white pieces, and he starts off e4. And then Les responds with his knight out, and then Levy brings out his bishop. And then we see Black push his other d-pawn, and then Levy's just supporting it with his pawn. And then we see both of the players put their knights in the middle. And this is important note for people who want to get into playing the d4 or queen's pawn openings, is the knight moving them to the center instead of the more natural moving it forward to like a c3 position here. And the idea of this is, in a lot of queen's pawn setups, you not only want to push the d-pawn, but a lot of the time the c-pawn is pushed also. From both sides, they like pushing the c-pawn. The c-pawn goes very well with the d-pawn here. And if you had your knight developed like to c3 here, it kind of hinders the c-pawn from pushing forward, and the knight gets in the way. But having the knight in the center not only supports this pawn later in a push, but then if the knight later wants to attack on the queen side, it can go off to the side here, and it never gets in the way of this pawn who later wants to push. So this is just something to be noted. If you want to get into playing more queen's pawn openings, moving the knight to the center is a stronger way to play it. So they both bring their knights to the center, and then we see kind of a symmetrical position as the grandmaster from Cuba then tries to defend his pawn in the center. We see developing the bishops, and then we later see this c-pawn push that we were expecting from earlier. And then Levy protects it with his c3 pawn here, kind of making kind of a Slav protection, but then also kind of a reversed colors queen's gambit declined by defending with the e-pawn. And he's got like this diamond setup here. And although this pawn is very well supported in the center, by having both the e and the c pawn supporting it, it might run into uncomfortable positions later for white, instead of just having one of these pawns. The e pawn out more like a queen's gambit decline setup. It's often more comfortable, or what I like playing more often is I'm more of a Slav player here, pushing the c-pawn, and then this e-pawn I like saving it back later in the game and not pushing it earlier. But instead, Levy pushes both of his pawns forward. And then we see a queen get developed. Levy brings his rook over to protect the pawn, and then Black pushes his e-pawn in the center. And right here, this position is looking very uncomfortable for white here. Although a computer will say that it's an equal position for both players, having all 3 of these pawns in the center puts a lot of pressure on the center pawn, and it could be very uncomfortable for white later in the game. He defends his center pawn with his knight and opens up the line for castling, and his opponent opens up his line for castling, and then both opponents castle. And then Levy pushes this a-pawn here. And the idea of this a-pawn push is to maybe later push this b-pawn to try to put more pressure on this c-pawn here that was attacking his center pawn. If Levy can break up the center pieces here, it'll be a lot more comfortable position for him to play. Right now it looks very uncomfortable with this strong center that Black has here, and if he broke it up, these pawns out of the way, it'll be a lot easier to play. Brings his rook over, and that's exactly what he does. Pushes his b-pawn to try to break up these center pawns. But instead, Black just pushes his pawn, attacking Levy's bishop, is to bring it back. And then we see his other bishop getting attacked, and he trades off knights, since there's no real great place he could retreat. And then we see him push this other center pawn to try to bust up black's strong center that he has going. And then we see a trade of pawns here. And right here, although that Levy has kind of busted up the center and traded pawns off, it looks very uncomfortable for black to play, or white to play, because black has this strong diagonal attacking this king here. His knight is better developed, and his bishop is better placed than all of white's pieces down here. And although he has this d-pawn, which will be good to later push in the game, black also has their own pass pawn here. Continues with this move, knight e4. And in this position, the computer, it says that it's kind of a mistake. And the computer prefers more of like a h push here or knight push, and we'll look at why those are different. The idea that Levy had here, putting his knight on e4, was to bring another defender for this f2 pawn, and then also to open up the lines with this queen to attack the bishop on d4. A stronger option would have been maybe to just slowly improve your position and kind of wait. It's not a great idea generally to wait in chess, but Levy doesn't have a lot of great options here. He is kind of on the defense in this position. And the idea of h3 is to prevent any bishops coming down or knights jumping to this g4 square. The other idea is sacrificing the knight temporarily on this pawn, and after black recaptures with their knight, then we see you taking off this bishop here. And then black takes his pawn here, and then you have to like move your rook. And here, although that Levy has weaker pawns, and he probably calculated this since he used more than 10 minutes on this move, these two pawns here is probably what he was scared of. The computer says that it's not that bad for white to play in this position. And it's not that bad for white to play in this position, but it looks very uncomfortable to a human to play, since they have these pawns that are just isolated here, and it looks very crazy. Instead, he plays this move, knight e4, which is kind of a mistake, and Lays responds correctly here, attacking the queen. And even though he's sacrificing his bishop, this right here, he's got a lot of attacks now on Levy. Levy is in big trouble. He can't push this pawn to try to protect it on f2 because of this strong diagonal. It's attacking the king here. His knight is well placed. His bishop's now attacking. And like a strong move here would to still wants h3 moving slowly in. But Levy plays the more human move, a natural move, e2. And the computer says this is a blunder here. This is a very human move. A lot of humans would probably play this move in the position to try to protect this knight so he can move his queen off this pin that's going here. And this is a blunder only if black finds the very unhuman move, queen g6, sacrificing the bishop on d4 again. And the idea of this is, since you can never take with this knight here, or you just open up this line with the bishop, so you take with the queen, then after black takes white's knight, and they capture back with the rook, then they have this fork hitting the queen and the king, and they can never take because of this diagonal with black's queen. And even if they didn't capture it, it's a very uncomfortable position because, like, if they go like a queen d2 instead of breaking up this pin, he's got other ideas, like he can sacrifice, he can still take this right here. And if he takes back, he's still got this fork going with on the queen and the king. Very uncomfortable position for Levy to play. And he would be completely destroyed if his opponent found this g6 move. And you can never even, after queen g6, like this looks pretty scary because you're walking into this pin here, but you can never even open up this line attacking the queen because the queen just moves away. And now all the threats that white had with his bishop here are gone. And white is still under all the same trouble that they had before. So instead, after Levy plays this move, his opponent was unable to find this move, and he instead plays the human move, trying to develop their knight to threaten like the bishop. And after we see trade-off of knight and temporarily losing this pawn, black then sacrifices the rook. And after Levy captures his rook, then we have this fork picking up the pawn he lost and then picking up the rook. And after we see Levy capturing back the bishop that he lost earlier, the position is now materially equal. Then he brings the queen in. And a stronger move here as black. Although his opponent played his queen down to f2 to try to protect the bishop, what the computer wants black to play here instead is maybe go bishop like d2 to later bring the bishop back to g5, and having it being supported by this pawn, holding off a blockade, and then protecting this square on d8 that this d pawn will later want to push to. But instead, he brings his queen down, and then the rook comes over. We see the rook move over, and then this looks very scary for white, but Levy defends it excellently. And now, although a computer says this is equal, Levy looked like he was going to get destroyed just a couple moves back. His position was terrible. Now he looks like he's in the driver's seat now. He looks like he can push this for a win. Although materially it's equal, this d-pawn is going to be a huge threat against black. This d-pawn's going to push down with a rook battery ramming it up through the center. And that's what he does. He just pushes this d-pawn up. And now it looks very bad for black. And the only good move that black plays here would have been like queen c6. And then you never have this move queen to e8 because the rook can just recapture. After you promote to a queen, it's just a trade-off of queens. And now we have queen and a bishop versus a rook and a knight, and black will win this any game, any day. And even if they trade off queens here, this position, the black king will walk over, and this pawn on d7, white will be unable to defend. And then their good pawn that they had pushing the whole game, they're going to lose. And although black is up a pawn, since they have these two pawns separate instead of together, most likely this game would end to a draw. But instead of finding this move, queen c6, black misses it and goes queen f6, or bishop f6. And here, now Levy finds the great move, sacrificing the queen. And now black can never capture back, where the pawn just takes and then he promotes to another queen. But he has to move his king away, and that's what he thought would be all right and okay. But now he loses the pawn. And now Levy is up a pawn, but this pawn is going to be extremely deadly against black here. And although he tries to defend it, we just see they're not playing necessarily the most accurate moves. The computer would have preferred maybe like h6, so you never have this threat of down here being checkmated and then moving this like knight up to like f3 here. But Levy instead brings his queen down, misses these tactics of like bringing his knight into the battle here, and then black doesn't capitalize on it. And then we just see the shuffling of a couple of pieces, Levy attacking black's pawns here, but then he just pushes them. And now he finds this move, knight f3. And here the computer says it is 3.1 better for white here, and Levy is on a good way to winning this game. Then we see the pieces just shuffle around, these queens a bit more, and then Levy ends up finding this fork, hitting the king and the queen. Now after we see trade of queens, this game is pretty much lost for black here. This knight will eventually hop around, maybe putting more pressure on this rook or holding this pawn right here, and they cannot really defend it easily as black. And at worst case scenario, if Levy doesn't play completely accurately, he is still guaranteed a draw. There's no way for black to win this game against him. So he hops this knight around, brings the knight around, and here now we can hold this pawn, but instead black decides to trade off the bishop for the knight. And now these two pawns are going to be near impossible for black to hold off. And although he's got these two pawns here, now he goes for a ditch effort back rank checkmate. Levy obviously doesn't fall for it, brings his king over. And now this game is pretty much lost for black here. He tries to hold off the pawns, and then he loses a pawn. And although this pawn's getting attacked, Levy just takes here. And after black captures his pawn, he finds this brilliant move, rook to f5. And this was the winning idea here, because it attacks the rook. And if you take the rook, then white queens, and this endgame is completely winning for white. And instead, say black takes white's pawn, now white captures black's rook, and the endgame is completely winning for white. So here, instead, black tries to move his rook away from this file, but then is protected the pawn with his rook, and then as he brings his king over, Levy queens, and in this position, you pretty much have to take with the queen. In this position, black just resigned, but you'd have to take the queen pretty much, and then we see this skewer hitting the king, and then after he moves, we see a trade-off of rooks, and then this endgame is completely winning for white here, because black has to worry about this pawn on b4, and as he's trying to defend this pawn off on b4, white just marches his king up these squares here, picks off black's pawns, and then it's two pawns just heading to the end zone to get this win. But back here, now there's mosquito in here. But back here, shoo mosquito. Okay, so back here, the game ends. And he resigns, and Levy wins another game. That's 3 wins out of 5 games for Levy, and the 2 others were draws. Levy was the lowest rated person in this tournament. He was the lowest seeded. People weren't expecting him to do great. He was just returning from retirement back to over-the-board chess. But he's been playing exceptionally well, and no one seems to be able to beat him. Right now, the tournament. He's leading the tournament with more points than anyone else in it. There's still several more rounds to go in the tournament, but it's looking great for Levy so far. And he should do pretty well so far in this tournament. Should be very well after he's beat another GM. It's just going great. If you have enjoyed this video, please hit that like button down below. It really helps. And subscribe if you have not already done before. I hope to see you in the next video.